What is up? Daniel here with the Virtual Robotics Studio, and we are now ready to start the first section of the shooter structure. But as always, before we start building, we got to give that special thanks to First and Argosy Foundation for making this possible. Okay, for this sub-assembly, and when I say sub-assembly, I mean we're going to assemble some parts together and then use that to go into the bigger assembly later. We need a bunch of things, but you might not need everything that we have out here. Everybody, though, is going to need our aluminum box. So this is, you can see the end, it's that box shape. This is 1 inch across by 1 inch tall, and the wall thickness is 1/16. So you need 2 8-foot sticks of these, not for this step, but in total. So you're going to need those. Also, you may or may not need this aluminum plate. So this is 1/8 inch thick wall, aluminum plate. But you won't need this plate if you buy these T-brackets from, I got these ones from Andy Mark, but there are a number of suppliers listed in the manual that you can order from. Now, I recommend buying these. It's just going to save you so much time. They're not that expensive. And shipping is pretty quick from all of the First suppliers. But if you did not buy these and you bought the aluminum plate, we're basically going to have to trace these out and make our own versions of these to hold our stuff together. We'll make a slightly simplified shape. Now, for fasteners, you have a choice. You can either use bolts, like we've been using to connect the frame together. So these are 1032 by, I believe, 1.5 inches long. We can check that out. Yep, by 1.5 inches long socket head cap screws and the matching nylock nuts for them. So you can use those to connect stuff together. I prefer, and I'm going to be mostly using, I'll show you an example with the bolts, but I'm going to mostly be using these rivets. So these are 3/16 pop rivets. And when you buy a rivet, you buy the diameter, which in this case is 3/16, and then you buy the grip length, which is how long this section here is. And you just want to get a grip length that is going to be able to go through like 1/8 of an inch and 1/16 of an inch or 2/8 of an inch. So anywhere around 1/4 inch grip length is going to be just fine. I think mine are actually go up to almost 0.3 something. So mine are a little bit, maybe slightly too long for this, but they're going to work just fine. All right, then tool-wise, we're going to need a whole bunch of things. So tape measure, obviously we're going to have to cut stuff. We need to measure it. We're going to be drilling a lot of holes. Now, if you're using the bolts, the recommended size to drill is a number 7 drill bit. It'll actually say number 7 on it. That is 0.201 inches in diameter. If you're doing rivets, you can go a little bit smaller. I actually have a lot of 3/16 drill bits, and the 3/16 drill bit usually for me works well with the rivets. So I'm going to be drilling primarily 3/16 holes. But with the bolts, you want a little bit of extra clearance just to make sure things line up and the bolt goes through nicely. Now, you could actually use either drill bit, a 3/16 for the bolts if you had to, if that's all you have. Or you could use the number 7 for the rivets as well. Okay, I also have a deburring tool. So I can clean the holes up. After we drill, there's going to be some mess in the holes, so we're going to use this to clean that up. If you don't have a deburring tool, sometimes you can also just use a really big drill bit and kind of spin it by hand in the hole. So we'll use that once or twice as well. Now we want to make sure that the structure we're building, we're going to build like a kind of an H shape. We want to make sure that our H is 90-degree corners, as straight as possible, parallel sides, all that. So we're going to have our square that we're going to use to help lay it out, mark our lines for cutting, and to keep it, square. Now, this square for me is a little bit too thick on the bottom and didn't always fit. So I also have a smaller one. This is a machinist square that I can use as well to fit in smaller places. You may or may not need that. If you're using bolts, you're going to need your trusty 3/8 wrench and 5/32 hex key or Allen wrench. If you're using rivets, you're going to need a riveter. Hand riveter works. It's kind of tiring after a while. I have a pneumatic riveter, which is pretty cheap. I think this thing from Harbor Freight was just like $50 this year or thereabouts. So if you have compressed air in your shop, this is a very cheap way to get a easy rivet tool. There are also electric ones, drill-based ones that you can get. Those sometimes are a little bit more expensive. And then to drill our holes, we are going to need our drill and our snap punch. So the snap punch is going to help us line up the holes and make sure we're drilling and keeping it in the right spot. All right. That, I think, is everything we need for this whole sub-assembly. But our first step is going to be to cut down our box aluminum to the right lengths. So let me get rid of everything here, bring in the saw, and let's get cutting. So in the manual, there is a cut list of parts that you can cut. Now, there are 2 sticks, and they're labeled in the manual as stick 1 and stick 2. And the idea is basically they measured the lengths of the parts, compensated for the fact that you lose a little bit every time you make a cut, and just tried to package them together so that you use up as much of one of the sticks as possible. Because there is a situation, right, where you could cut some things on one, some things on the other, and the amount you have left on the two remaining ends is not enough to fit the longest piece. So I recommend following the list as they put it in the manual, but if you're not going to follow the list, cut your biggest things first. So in order for us to follow it, that's why I have two sticks here. We actually can cut everything we need off of just one of them. We're going to be doing our horizontal beam and our upright, our vertical upright. And the vertical one is 25.5 inches. The horizontal one is 16.25 inches. And they're on two different pieces. So our 16.25 inch pieces are going to come off of stick 1. Our 25.5 inch pieces are going to come off of stick 2. And again, if you got your saw out and it takes extra time to get set up, you can run through that entire cut list and make all the cuts at once, just so you have all the pieces done, label the parts with their name, and put them on the side, and then come back and get them when you need them. What we're going to do just for the videos is we'll cut just the pieces we need for this part of the subassembly, and we'll break the saw back out. We'll cut the other pieces when we get to that step. So let's get to work. We'll start on stick 1 then. Let me set this one on the ground. And I said 16.25 inches is what we're going to do. So you can work from either end, but I'm going to just pull this out, aim for 16.25 inches. And again, a couple things to help you be more precise. When you lay this tape measure out, if the distance stays the same, because if I measure this way, right, I'm at the corner here, but I'm way out in the middle over here. So I'm actually on a diagonal. My measurement is going to be slightly less accurate. So I always try to you don't have to be perfect, but you kind of eyeball it so that the gap stays the same all the way along. And if you tip the tape measure down, right, at the point we're trying to mark, then you're not kind of up in the air and guessing where it is. I can go right next to that 16.25 spot right here. And I'm going to make a line. And I put the line so that the edge of this line is on the 16.25. So when I cut, I want to just remove all the line and no more. That's exactly where I want to stop. All right. So now we're ready to clamp this up in our saw. Remember, again, if you don't have this kind of saw, and there are a few different brands of this. I think there's the Evolution, I think it sounds right, Rage saw is a fairly cheap one, but still very reliable for this. But I think it is still around a couple $100s, maybe a little more. But if you don't have this kind of saw, if you have your metal jigsaw, right, go ahead and clamp this to the table, run your metal jigsaw around it. If you only have a, that Sawzall that I brought out earlier, reciprocating saw, you can try to do that the same to make the cut. If you have a small bandsaw like we have here, this is too big of an amount over here. This is too big of an amount for us to cut off in one go on the bandsaw. So what you might have to do is use one of those other saws, cut close to it, and then go over to the bandsaw and make a nice clean cut to finish it off. All right, but let's go ahead and get this clamped up. I'm going to, again, always kind of clean up your surface before you cut. This goes with the bandsaw as well, because you want it to be sitting nice and flat. All right, and let's line this up. And remember, I said the line needs to go away entirely. And also, by the way, as we do this, if you're using one of those other saws and you need to be able to follow a line all the way across, that's when you grab your square and you can line that up, and you can continue that line all the way across the piece. So for me, I don't need to. As long as I'm lined up on the mark, then the saw is going to cut straight with this sort of saw. All right, let's go. I want to just remove all of the line. And I will say with this one too, the width that we make this cut is going to determine the width of our structure. So if we cut this one too wide, you might have to come in and file it down so it actually, fits. We don't really want this 16.25 to be bigger than 16.25. It can be a little smaller, but bigger is going to make it harder to fit into the chassis when we do that. So with that in mind, let's make our first cut. Clamped up, let's go for it. All right, let me grab a file for that end. You can do the inside too a little bit. But you actually do have to file a little bit before you measure, because if there's a big burr there, that can affect your measurement. All right, and let's see where we are. I'll do it upside down so it's right side up for you. All right, 16 and just a tiny bit short. I might be about a 64th inch short of a quarter here. So it's very, very close. That's going to work for us. Now we need to do another one, and we can do this a few different ways. I can, of course, take this piece out, mark it all the same way that we did before. I am going to file the end, though, so I have a clean end to measure from. You can also, if you're careful and you have cleaned ends, you can kind of use something to square them up on the bottom like this. And then, you know what? That's the length we want it to be. So that is where I could just trace that line. So as long as you can keep that lined up, I can use that sort of as a ruler here to where I want to be. So now the difference are, again, that line, I'm going to try to remove all of that line when we make this cut. Okay, let's go for it. And this one, we have to file both sides, because I only filed the one side that I was measuring from on the other end of this piece. So let's knock off those bits on the inside too. Feels pretty good. Let's finish cleaning up this side here. And let's see how we did. They look really close to the same. I think one is just a tiny bit smaller than the other one. So this one was our 16. It was just almost exactly 16 1/4, and this was the one that was just a hair under. Okay, so they're going to both work. They're basically the same length. If I really wanted them to be exactly the same, I could. This one is just a tiny bit longer. I could file the end of this one down until it was perfect. I could take it over to, we've got a disc sander, so I could bring it into the disc sander to try to take it down faster. But like, this is more than close enough for what we're going for. And they're both 16.25 or a tiny bit below, which is what I was aiming for. I didn't want them any longer than 16. Now, let's label these. These are our horizontal pieces. So I'm just going to label them with, we'll just do horizontal. And normally, if I were just writing a little bit on there, like if I were just putting a number on there, like this is part number 1, I would write it in a few different places. But because when it sits on the shelf, oils and stuff like that can often make Sharpies wipe off easier. I'm actually using, this is the Milwaukee Ink Zal, which I think they're like $1 at Home Depot. It's supposed to be more resistant and write better on oils. But these things can wipe off if they're left to sit for too long. So you never want to trust just one Sharpie mark, one small Sharpie mark. But here, I could erase a lot of the horizontal and I would still know what this piece was. So those pieces are good. We'll set them off to the side. Now, if you remember, the 16.25 pieces were getting cut off of one of these pieces, stick number 1. We need to switch over to stick number 2 to do our other cuts. So I have a brand new 8 foot tall, actually this is only 6 feet tall, so I'm gonna have to make some changes. But if yours is 8 feet tall, like the instructions say, then you'll be good. All right, so for this one, on number 2, we are gonna make our 2 cuts of 25.5 inches. And sure, I'll clamp it in to help hold it in place for me. All right, 25.5. is much longer than I thought. All right, now we have enough space. Okay, 25.5, here we go. 25.5, and I'm drawing the line so that the edge of the line is on that ½ inch mark. So I know I want to get rid of the line, and I'll be at 25.5. And again, remember, you can use that square. I like to kind of put the marker on the mark and then bring the square in till it touches, and that's sort of how you know it lines up. I missed by a little bit, so I actually can just adjust it a tiny bit forward and try again until it lines up with the part of the mark that you wanted to line up with. That looks pretty good. Oh, and I got some cool streaking lines too. All right, let's cut this. Make sure there's nothing in here. That looks good. Make sure it's flat, tighten it up, and here we go. All right, let's get our ends cleaned up. It's a little bit on one of these factory edges. So if your piece is brand new from the store, you can usually trust the edge that they cut onto it. It's usually not perfectly level, but it's usually close. But sometimes it doesn't hurt to check. So we could actually come in and check, you know, by eyeballing how level is that edge. And, you know, maybe it's the slightest bit not straight, but it's pretty close. So, but you always want to check that, especially if you're just grabbing a piece off your shelf where you had extra material. You want to check that because you don't know who made the last cut and how straight they made the last cut. So if it's on a big angle, then you'll probably make 2 cuts, one to get a straight edge and then measure and do your other cut. All right, so this is one of our vertical pieces. So I'll put vertical on here. And then we'll use this again, just like we did before, we'll use this as our ruler to line up our second cut so we can get them as close to the same length as possible. Let's file that other end too. So we got to file this end too so we can put them flat next to each other. And we might as well do all of it because we're just going to have to do it after we cut it either way. So, all right, that looks good. Okay, right, and we want, basically, I can use these to kind of help hold them. We're going to use this as a flat edge over here to try to get them the same. I'm going to clamp this in because the angle was making it hard. Tip down on an angle was making it hard. So we're going to put that in until they are flush, sitting nice and flat. You want to line your square up on the bottom one, or on the top one, the one that you cut, right? And then adjust it until it hits the bottom, because then they'll both be nice and flat to each other. So that looks pretty good. Sometimes you can even feel with your finger that the gap is, you know, that there's no gap. Sometimes you can feel better than holding the square up against it. So we'll get that lined up. Still feels good. I bumped it a little bit. No, it's still good. All right, let's do our line here. And we want to remove that line in this cut. Looks good. See how it goes. Clean it up. And once again, really, really close to the same length. One is, I don't know, that's less than a 30-second, maybe a 64th longer than the other one. Almost can't tell the difference. Okay, so perfect. We labeled one vertical. Let's label the new one vertical. Vertical. All right, and now we have these two pieces done. Let's go check out how to make a T-bracket if you haven't purchased your T-brackets. And then I think we'll be ready to start assembling. Okay, so again, if you bought your T-brackets, you're good. Just use your T-brackets, move on in the video, and start your assembly. If you didn't buy T-brackets, there's a couple different ways you can make them. You can buy this aluminum plate at any aluminum supplier. I think Home Depot probably has pieces that will work. And option number one, you could get the drawing for this. It's on the Andy Mark website. You probably, if you're following along with this video, will want to do the Andy Mark one because then your layout will be the same. But other companies have similar products and they will all work fine. But if you print it out, and you can print it out one-to-one, you can actually take that printout and tape it down onto your aluminum and then go and cut out the shape. But this is kind of a weird shape to cut out, right? Like we have these curved corners here, filleted corners, and it's not going to be super easy for us to cut that out. And if we're laying it out and we don't have a good one-to-one printout, or we don't have one of these to trace, right? Like tracing it would be easy, but if you don't have any of them to trace, we need a different way to do it. So we can kind of rebuild this shape, but instead of being kind of a T-shaped, it's going to end up being straight lines everywhere. So instead of this curved section, we'll just do a straight cut between here and here. And that's going to work fine. It's not going to interfere with anything, but it's going to be a little bit easier for us to cut out and use. So let's go ahead and take a look at how I would do that. So first thing is, if we measure this going across, it is 5 inches across. Okay, so we're at 5 inches here. And you can measure it with the calipers and get your numbers that way. So I've got my 5-inch, 5.0 whatever, or 4.99 something here. You can do it with a tape measure too. To be honest, this doesn't have to be that accurate. So tape measure is fine for this step. So we got 5 inches there. If I go this way, I get 3 inches. So we have 5 inches by 3 inches, and the other number we need is how wide is one of these legs. And one of those legs is in fact 1 inch. So I got 0.998 on here. So we know kind of how to set this up then. We know that we need to be 5 inches across here. And again, you can set this up in a number of ways. If you have this kind of square, you can line that up on here, on the edge of this. And we can go out to 5 inches and make a mark. And so, that's probably the way I'll end up doing it, is off of this. So I can go to 5 inches and make a mark. Another option is, if I only have the tape measure, I'll go tape measure to 5 inches and make a mark. And if you have calipers, you can set the calipers to 5 inches. And with the calipers, it's really nice because you can set it to 5 inches and lock them. And you can actually just drag it along the edge, and it cuts a little line. It scribes a little line, which is a little hard to see, and sometimes it's hard to see in person too. So if you color in the area where your scribe line is going to be first, with a Sharpie or a marker, then when I go through here and scribe it, it should be a little bit more visible. Plate sliding on me a little bit, but there we go. So now it should hopefully be showing up. We can see this one fine line in the middle here. Okay, so that's one of our lines, right? That's our 5 inches across. Now we need to do 1 inch up from the bottom. So I would, if I were doing this myself, I would go on the calipers and do 1 inch. We'll go ahead and do this one with the square coming up 1 inch. So I'll take this off the edge of the table here. So we'll line it up, and I'm going to make a mark at 1 inch going across. So this is my 1 inch point right here. Okay, and we need that 1 inch mark on the other side as well. So I'm going to do a quick 1 inch mark over here at the edge. And for this, again, If you're accurate, that's good. It doesn't actually have to be that accurate, but the nicer your flat edges are, the easier it's going to be to assemble, because you can use the flat edges to guide stuff. But this shape, if this is 1 inch perfectly or a little bit bigger than 1 inch, it's all going to work just fine. All right, now, let's do the rest of the layout with the calipers so we can be a little bit more accurate. The next thing we have to do is we know, right, we need this point here, and then we can connect these lines to finish it out. So we got to figure out where should this be. If this is 1 inch wide and it's centered and the whole thing is 5 inches, that means it should be 2 inches in from this side and 3 inches to the other side of it. So if we take our calipers and put them at 2 inches, I'm going to get it right to 2 and lock it. Okay, 1.999. That should be close enough. And then let's see where we need to be. We're going to be about 3 inches up. So these lines are going to be somewhere in 3 inches up. So we need to be somewhere around here. We want to scribe into that area. And then 1 inch over, so we're going to end up doing our second scribe mark into this area. Okay, so our 2 inches, we should be able to go through that stuff I just put down. There we go. Then we open it up to 3 inches and do the same thing. Okay, and then we need to do our 3 inches again up from the bottom because that's where it crosses over. So we can kind of color in for that line as well. So we'll do 3 inches here like this. Okay, and we can see actually since we have the plate, that lines up pretty much perfectly with that line there and the going downward lines. So now the last thing we have to do is we want to connect those lines. And we can do that either by taking, a straight edge and going from this point where we had the 1 inch to that point where they cross and just kind of bringing our line up like that. Or we could get a punch or scribe. So my snap punch here has a sharp edge. So I can line it up this time and scribe that line down. So then we have the finer scribed line. Of course, we can't see it very well, so you might still want to color it in with the Sharpie first, and then you can scribe that line. Okay, right from that point down to there. Okay, so I can kind of see that. So if we cut out this shape, it's going to be a little bit bigger, a little bit heavier than the original, because we have all of this material in here that is going to be hanging out. But we just have to make straight cuts all the way around to get the shape that's going to work. So let's go ahead and take this over to the bandsaw. Let's cut this one out. And we'll be ready to use it. All right, so I've got my laid out piece. We're over at the bandsaw, and I made a mistake, which is I can't fit it this way to cut it out. I can make that cut, but I'll have to cut all the way in from the other side to get this to disappear. So probably I should have put this on this side of the plate or on the opposite side of where it is. But if you make that mistake, you can either re-lay it out, but I'm just going to make a cut this way, and then I'll cut it upside down, and I'll just leave myself some margin for error to clear it out, and then we'll go back and we'll finish the plate off perfectly. Yep. Guess before we start on the bandsaw, we should lower the guard down here. Since got a thin piece this time, that looks good. All right, let's go. And cutting this out again, it doesn't have to be super accurate, but just take your time, follow the line. Okay, and this is where I went past. I'm going to cut it off so I have a small plate, and then I'll be able to go back and finish it all up. A little farther on this side. All right. So now we can go back and make our diagonal cuts. And I just took that diagonal cut all the way through to the end. It's easier than trying to stop and turn and make the other cut at the same time. So now I'll do the straight cut on the top. And this one I'll stop and back out from, and we'll do the last diagonal cut in from the other side. All right, let's file this up, and then let's see how it compares to one of the store-bought T-brackets. All right, here is our filed homemade bracket compared to the T-bracket. Let's see how they line up here. If I line this up on the bottom, they're pretty much perfect height-wise and lengthwise. My corner's maybe not in exactly the right spot, but you know that's pretty close and is more than close enough for what we're going to do. Now, turns out when we go to align this, right, we're going to have the vertical bracket and the horizontal post going across like something like this. Not exactly, but something like this. And you know the T-bracket will fit here in a way that makes sense, right? But our bracket will do kind of the same thing. So really, we're just lining up this outside edge there. We're just trying to center this on the other edge. And we can drill and bolt or rivet wherever we want along this plate. Like, we don't have to follow the rules. There are no rules. But it does kind of make sense for us to match the hole pattern that's on this T-bracket. So we can do that too. This works much better with the calipers though. So we can measure that. Now the holes on here are halfway up from the bottom. So that means it's 0.5 inches up from the bottom to the center of the holes on this piece. So we can set our calipers to 0.5. And once again, we'll try to color this all the way across so we have a nice, hopefully visible line here that we can work with. So we'll leave a mark on the table too. All right, and if I scribe at 0.5 all the way across, that is the line that we want to drill our holes on. Then we can see where they are along the edge. So the first one is 0.5, and then hole to hole is 1 inch. So if I set this to 0.5, again, because I undid it and I shouldn't have, I can scribe here. That cross is my first hole. Then we'll go to 1.5. So you always want to measure from the same side. All of your measurements should be from the same side. So I'm going to set this to 1.5, and then we'll mark there. Then we've got another one at 2.5. So we'll set the calipers to 2.5. Do a mark there. 3.5. And if you don't have a pair of calipers, Harbor Freight calipers are pretty cheap. I think they're under 20 bucks. Maybe they're exactly $20. And they are accurate enough for everything that we're doing. So it is a worthwhile investment. We'll scratch our 3.5 line. And then our 4.5 line finally. So again, I could do ½ inch from the other side, but because all of our measurements are from 1 point, we want to make sure that the hole-to-hole distances stay right. And there's no guarantee that this piece, it was close to the right length, but it's probably not exactly 5 inches. So you're always better off by doing all your measurements from one side. All right, so there we go on that. And then this one gets a little bit trickier to do the other holes because we can't scribe the 0.5 forever or the 2.5 inch line forever up because we're going to end up running out of space. What we can kind of do is if you can hold it next to another piece and set it at 2.5. I might need a flatter piece than this. We'll see. Yep, that one is too tall. So if you have another something like this that we can set it against, we can potentially use the outside or the inside measuring jaws instead of the outside ones here. And I'm going to run it along my square here and down. But let's go ahead and color in the area so we can see where stuff is. Okay, so as long as I keep these two together, probably you want one person holding those together, then I can scribe that line up this way. And at the very bottom, there's still enough room for me to scribe through that. So now I have a line that's pretty much all the way up. And then what do we need? We have the 1/2 inch from the bottom. And then the next one is going to be 1.5. And then, yep, 2.5. So I'm at 2.5, so I'll do that one first. We scribe from the bottom across here. And then down to 1.5. And across here. So now we have all of those points where we're going to have to drill a hole. So on every place where those things cross, I'm going to go ahead and use my snap punch to put a little divot in. And the idea with the snap punch is that when you're drilling on metal, the drill bit will have a tendency to walk around a little bit. So especially if you start on a little bit of an angle, it'll like walk around to different positions. But by putting that little snap punch divot in, if you get the point of the drill bit in that divot, that should help keep it centered and drilling where you want it to drill. So I'll go through, and everywhere there's a cross, I'm just going to line up and snap punch. And again, this one doesn't have to be super accurate, so it's okay if you miss the plus by a little bit, but try to keep it as close to where the lines cross as you can. So we got 5 across the bottom. Also, if you miss a little bit, like I'll miss this one a little bit, I'm a little bit low on that one, a little bit towards me. What I can do is put the snap punch in the divot and angle it back towards the direction I want to go. Then when I snap punch, the hole actually moves a little bit. So if you're just a tiny bit off, you can usually correct it that way. All right, let's get this one. So we have 3 in the middle, 5 across the bottom. And that looks good. Now we could go ahead and drill these out before assembly. But it doesn't save us that much. So I think we're just going to end up clamping it up, and we'll drill those holes as we're assembling our pieces together. All right, so let's move on to that step. Let me move some of these things out of the way. We need our vertical bar and our horizontal bar here. And the first step, though, is to figure out where to locate this bracket along here. Since our length is pretty good, we should be able to use the edge of the bracket. Certainly if you bought brackets, you can use the edge of the bracket. Maybe the first one I do, I will line up with, I guess the first joint we'll use one of each. So you can see which way works for you. Okay, so we're gonna do 8 inches, and it's gonna be from the top of this vertical bar. But right now there is no top and bottom, so it doesn't matter. But 8 inches from one side. So we're gonna go ahead and line this up. Go down to 8 inches, and my line is going to be so that the edge this way is 8. So this way is 8, that way is just extra line. And I could, but I probably don't need to, go through and do this to copy it all the way across. Our goal is going to be now that we attach our bracket on this line, but the whole bracket should be past the line. So when we're on here, we should have 8 inches and then the bracket, and the bracket is sticking out the other way. And it doesn't really matter right now if you attach it on this side or you attach it on this side. It's just whether you're building the left side of our back, I guess, H-shaped support structure first or second. And with the store-bought store-bought brackets, it's really easy because they're the width of the aluminum. So when you're lining it up, you're basically making sure that it's not sticking off this way or this way. Like you can make sure it's flat on both sides. And then just bring it up to the line, and that's where we want to attach it to drill it. With our custom bracket, we have a pretty clean side as well. So it's kind of the same idea, except we can't check on the front edge because we have our diagonal coming out. But our back edge is nice and flat. So in this case, we want to keep our back edge nice and flat and then line our edge up to the line. But I can't just hold it here and drill, so we're going to need to grab some clamps to hold this all together. Okay, and you'll need 1.5 inches or bigger clamps, I think, because these are, it's going to be 1.25 inches total thickness when we put everything on together. Okay, oh, and also, right, we have to put one on this side. We're going to also put one on the other side like this. So that means we need to have our 8-inch mark on both sides. So we'll also go ahead and measure 8 inches on this side, on the opposite face. Same idea. That looks good. Now C-clamps are good for this. There are lots of different types of clamps you can use. You'll need at least 1.5 inch C-clamps. These I love. These are kind of, I mean, I guess they're made by Vice Grip, but they're clamps that kind of snap in place. And so they're much faster to use. So to put this on, once I get the dimensions set, which, you know, you screw the little screw on the back, but once I have the right dimension, I just squeeze it, that's locked, I can pop it off, and I'm ready to go again. So these are super fast, but we'll do the first one with C-clamps because that's more common and they're a little bit cheaper for everybody to get. So what I'm going to try to do is line up both of these brackets, ideally at the same time on the line. Now you can do one at a time if you have to, if you are riveting. If you're bolting, you cannot. If you're bolting, you have to do both of them at the same time. And you also have to make fairly sure that you're lined up correctly if you're going to use bolts. A little bit more room for error with the rivets. Okay, that's pretty close. And this is a situation where if you have a second person, it's going to help a lot. So one person can try to hold everything lined up, and the other person then can tighten the clamps down. But if you have to, there are a couple tricks to being able to do it by yourself. So one thing is, if I put these clamps on, but I don't make them super tight, I'm going to make them like tight, but not, you know, not locked in place tight. But also, when you're putting the clamps on, make sure you have room to drill the holes. If you cover up too many of the holes, you could be in trouble. But I'm just going to cover up the outside holes, and I'll leave the inside holes usable. So now at this point, the clamps are kind of tight, but if I tap or push hard, I can still move the brackets around. So this is a good chance now for me to take something that is nice and flat, and I'm going to kind of use that on the back end here to try to push it out so it's not sticking back past the aluminum beam, the aluminum box here. So I can try to get it nice and flat that way. This one I think I have to push in on one side and out on the other. And you can, if you have to tap this at this point, you could use a hammer to kind of tap it to adjust them, to do fine adjustments, but it's just little taps in that case. Okay, we're really close. So I use that kind of square to line it up, but if you feel by rubbing your finger along the edge, you can feel if it's a big bump or if it's lined up. So this feels pretty lined up to me, so I'm going to go ahead and give these clamps that extra bit to actually turn them down and lock it into place. Okay, now we are almost ready to drill. What's nice is because we're going to be drilling on this side, we're going to be drilling into the T-bracket that's already there. We don't need to snap punch the middle of this hole. because the guide, the bracket, will act as our guide. So the drill bit will sit in there, and we'll be able to trace that all the way through. And on this side, we already snap punched, so we're good on that. Now, it is a little bit awkward with these clamps on to drill, so you might have to have it like hanging off the table and have one person holding it or clamped it onto the table here so that you can get to it to drill. If you have a vise, you could clamp this in the vise, and that would work really well. Let me go ahead and clamp this to the table. So I'll grab one of my quick clamps here. And the hole you're drilling, you want to be kind of as close to the table as you can make it. So I'm not going to have it hanging way off. I'll bring it in until it's hitting my clamp, and I can't do any better than that. And then we'll kind of squeeze this down to hold it. Okay, and I will still end up holding this side when I drill to help support it. Because you can see if I don't, there's still some play. You might be able to get a second clamp on depending on how your table is set up and everything like that. Now, we're going to do a couple of different methods here. Like I said, I prefer the rivet approach. So we're definitely going to do mostly rivets, but the first hole that we're going to do, we'll go ahead and do a bolt just to show you how that works. Now, with the bolt, you have to be kind of careful because if you imagine, we have two of these plates on opposite sides of our box here, and theoretically, the holes are lined up, but they might be a little bit off. And if we drill straight through, it'll go straight through both of the holes. But if you drill on a little bit of an angle, it may not find the hole on the other side. So you have to try to drill as straight as possible if you're doing this with a hand drill. My recommendation would be if you're doing bolts and you have a drill press, you should make this first drill, or you should make the through holes on the drill press, because then you know you're going to be drilling straight through and it's going to line up on both sides. Now, if you're doing the drill, or the bolts, make sure you use that number 7. It's a little bit bigger than the bolt, so you have a little bit of play. So if you're a little bit off from drilling perfectly straight, that should be okay. And I get an extra benefit, which is that because mine, on the other side, I didn't drill those holes in yet, because now if I miss a little bit from where that snap punch is, it doesn't matter. If my bolt's a little bit crooked, but it goes through and it attaches both of them, we're in good shape. So if you're doing homemade brackets, don't drill the holes until it is all together. It's always best to drill the hole through everything that the hole goes through at the same time. So in this case, it goes through both brackets and this is our vertical post in the middle. So if you can do all three at the same time, then you know the hole's going to line up. All right, but we'll go ahead. We'll try to do this one with the hand drill. We'll see how straight I can drill. There is a technique if you do not have a drill press and you have to do it with the hand drill. There is a technique for this, which is if I'm drilling and I'm standing over here, like it's easy for me to look down and see this angle. Like that's the direction, that's the plane I'm looking in, but it's hard for me in that position to see this angle. So if you have to do this by hand, you probably want to have two people. Have one person over here drilling and looking this way, and have a second person over here controlling this angle. And actually, this person should probably have their hand on the top of the drill to help actually just align it. Just move it instead of trying to communicate back and forth. Because if you're like, oh, move it a little, move it a little, move it a little, you're probably going to run into some problems. All right, but what I'm going to do is kind of just watch both sides at once, and we'll see how straight I can drill. One last trick. Sometimes if you can't see really well what the angle is, if you put something like a square nearby, then you have something to reference off of to help try to keep you straighter. All right, let's give this a shot. Okay, and I drilled through the first hole and I stopped. Because when you break through, you sort of drop down until you hit the next wall, and you can very easily be on an angle at that point. So if you just keep drilling, you're gonna probably make your angle worse. Instead, once you get through that first wall and it drops down, now I'm gonna reassess. I'm gonna be like, am I happy with how straight this direction is? Am I happy with how straight that direction is? And when I am, then I will start drilling again. Okay, and my hole took a little bit longer than yours would if you're using 2 of the pre-drilled brackets, because I had to drill through the bracket on the other side as well. All right, let's see how that went. We'll go ahead and unclamp this from the table, but don't take your other clamps off. We're gonna leave those on. Also, when you're drilling, you kind of always want 2 clamps, because 1 clamp, you can usually still rotate the piece. That's why I put 2 on there. And, well, you can see if you look at the top, I am not centered on where that punch would have been. I'm close, but I'm not exactly centered. So that is another reason why if you use the drill press, it's going to be a little bit better, but it is close enough that my bolt goes through, of course, because I didn't have the hole here. If you did have the hole on this side and you missed a little bit, then what you'll see is when you drill through, that hole, instead of staying round, right, ends up, you'll oval it a little bit, but your bolt will still fit in, you can still tighten it, and you're still good to go. All right, so we'll go ahead and add the nut to this side and get our 3/8 inch wrench here and our hex key, and we'll go ahead and tighten this one down. Okay, and that's pretty tight. All right, so that is the first hole. If you're doing bolts, you're going to continue that process for all of the rest of them. I'm going to switch over to rivets now. I think rivets are better for a few reasons. I think they're faster to put in. I think it's easier to not have to drill all the way through with rivets. We're just going to drill through one side at a time. So the alignment is a little bit easier for us. Rivets are also lighter. Now that's not a problem with this robot. This robot is nowhere near the weight limit, but there is a weight limit. And if you're adding more systems to this, which is one of the things that we encourage, is once you're done and this robot works, to go back and say, what else can we add? Well, that's going to take more weight. So saving a little bit of weight here might help you down the road, especially as your robots get more and more complex. So we're going to switch to rivets. In this case, you can keep, if you have the number 7 drill bit and that's all you've got, you can keep drilling with the number 7. You can drill with a number, I think 11 would be a good size too. That's a little bit bigger. But I have a lot of 3/16 drill bits, which is 1/87-ish in diameter. And this has always worked well for me with rivets. So this is a little bit smaller. It's sometimes harder to get the bolt to go in. Sometimes the rivet will stick a little bit, but it's going to work just fine. Okay, so I have 2 more holes on this side. I'm going to drill one of the holes. And this time, we're only going to go through the first wall. We're not going to go through the second wall. So once it drops in, we're done. That hole is set. And now what we can do is our rivet should fit into this hole. And you can see it drops right in. So if your rivet's a little tight, that might be one reason to go up to the slightly bigger drill bit size. You can sometimes drill again. It helps clean stuff up. But a lot of times too, if it's tight, if you put the rivet in your riveter first, you can use the riveter to kind of push this in and get it past stuff. So we're ready to rivet. Normally, when you drill a hole, we want to deburr that hole. So really, this bottom plate, I should have deburred, which is to knock off the edges where the drill bit popped through before putting the bolt on. It actually looked pretty clean, but still something you should do. In this case, the top plate is pre-drilled for me, so there's no reason to file that down or deburr it. So when you're using a hand riveter, the key is, like, you don't want the riveter at an angle. You don't want to have a gap between the rivet head and the plate. So try to keep everything nice and flat, and you just push it down all the way, squeeze it down until it's closed. Now, depending on your rivet and your riveter, you might already be done. But in this case, my rivets, I said, were a little long. So what I have to do is open my riveter up all the way. I actually have to pull it open, get it to drop down flat again, and then I squeeze a second time. And then at some point, it will pop like that, break off. And again, depending on the riveter you have, your rivet shank might come out easily. Mine doesn't. On this one, sometimes I have to pull it open the rest of the way, and then it comes out. So just depends on what kind of rivet tool you have. Again, we'll do the second one, but the second one we'll start using the pneumatic riveter. So we have one more hole that's not covered by clamps here. So I'm going to go ahead and drill that hole. Okay, looks good. And then let me get an air line. And the pneumatic riveter, basically, my hands will get tired from using the riveter nonstop. This one, we're going to use air power to get it done. But it's the same process. I'll put the rivet in the riveter, work it into the hole, get it flat, and then just pull the trigger. And that is much easier, especially as we're going to be doing a lot of these holes. Okay, So we've got 3 things in on this side. I would like to start drilling the other side, but I can't do that yet because these clamps are in the way. Now we have a bolt that's in and tight, which is helping to hold it. So in this case, I can take one of these clamps off and use the bolt and a clamp as my 2 clamps. If you can't do that, if you didn't do the bolt at all, actually, one thing that we might want to do when we're riveting these plates is have one facing up, one facing down, so we can get some drilling on both sides. But if you have to, you can just take the clamp off, turn it upside down, tighten it back on, and now you're ready to go with the holes that you can see. All right, but, I mean, really, I could probably sneak this on the side here and still have it, and we can get to both of those holes. Okay? Now, the temptation is to just drill all the holes and then go back and put all the rivets in. The problem is, everything is clamped up. If we make no mistakes and everything is clamped up and nothing moves, that will work. But it's fairly common for things to get bumped or nudged out of place when you're drilling. The drill adds a decent amount of force and can make stuff move if you didn't have it quite clamped all the way. So if you drill all the holes first and come back and put the rivets in, there's a chance that the rivets will not all line up. So when we do fasteners like this, you always do one hole, put the thing in the hole, do the next hole, put the rivet in or the bolt in, do the next hole, put the rivet in, put the next hole, put the rivet in, one at a time all the way through. So let's go ahead and drill one of these holes. This time I'm going to use that snap punch mark to line it up. Okay, looks good. Now this time I can feel there are burrs on the edge of this hole. Because again, we just drilled directly into this stuff. So again, there are 2 ways to do it. If you got one of these cute little deburring tools, you just kind of put it in and whirl it around, and that breaks down the edges. If you don't have one of those, you can use just a bigger size drill bit. And if you put it in by hand and twist it, that will also sort of break down those edges. Sometimes I actually think the drill bit works a little bit better, depending on the angle and the access. But when you're using the drill bit, look, the edges, these spirals, the flutes, those are cutting edges. They're sharp. So if you're going to do this with a drill bit, make sure you only hold the part that is round, not the part that has cutting surfaces, or wrap it with a towel or a shop rag or something like that. Okay, this hole is now ready for a rivet. I'm going to get that pneumatic riveter going here. And that one's done. I can drill, I think, one more hole on this side before I have to move clamps. So we'll go ahead and drill this hole in. All right. Let's go in with the deburring tool here. I think now I can take this clamp off for sure, and that gives me much more room to deburr. Looks good. And rivet. Same pattern all the way through both of these brackets. Okay, at this point, I think both sides have 3 fasteners in, so we can take the clamp off entirely, and we'll go ahead and drill our last 2 holes here. Couple drilling tips when you're drilling. Make sure your drill is in the higher speed. A lot of them will have 2 speeds on top, 2 and 1. Some might have 3 speeds. Be in the higher speed for this. We're drilling pretty small holes, and aluminum is not that hard of a material compared to like steel and stuff. Deburr the hole. Also, when you're drilling, pull the trigger. Let all the way. Let the drill spin up to full speed as you're drilling through the hole, so that the tool can do the work and you don't have to. You can push down a little bit, but you shouldn't be pushing down super hard. And another thing too is, you can usually feel when it's just about to break through the bottom wall, so you can actually stop pushing down so hard. You saw sometimes my drill drop down pretty hard, but if you're careful, you can get it to just drill through and not drop down because you can feel that end coming. All right, we got one more hole here. Let's get that one done. Deburr, clean the hole, and let's rivet. All right, flip it back over, and then I'll clamp it back to the table here. And we have 2 more holes on this side that we haven't finished yet. So let's get those 2 drilled and riveted. Also, if you are working as a group, right, probably have one person that's doing the drilling and one person that's doing the riveting, so you can trade back and forth quickly and kind of build more efficiently that way. All right, last hole. It is much faster too when you only have to drill through the 1/16 of the box and not also drill through our bracket like on the other side. All right, first bit is connected. I'm gonna kind of wipe this stuff off the table so we have a flat surface to work on. All right, so you should be able to do this with bolts or rivets as you see fit, as your team chose. Our next step is to take the horizontal bar, and that horizontal bar should fit in between here, and that is going to go across like this, because I think it's on the top. And then we'll have the same thing on the other side, right? So let's go ahead and get this horizontal bar attached. Now there's a couple things that we want to do to line it up. If you have the store-bought brackets, you're pretty much set. You just want to do the same thing again where you line it up so that it's flat on the 2 walls there. And then you can use a square of some kind to come in here. And I can see right now I've got a little bit of gap, a little bit of daylight up here. So I'm going to have to rotate this up until it's nice and flat. And that's squared. Then I could go ahead and clamp this and drill it. If you're working on this side, it's a little harder to align between our cuts here. So we're going to do basically the same thing. You put it in, line it up kind of where you think it should go, use the square to make sure it's square. But the other check is going to be use the tape measure. And we could actually do this before we even put this piece in. But we know it should be 8 inches to the bracket, and we know it's 2 inches of the bracket to the bar. So we know that when this is lined up correctly, as it is now, it should be 10 inches to the bottom of this bar, to the top of this bar, depending on which way you're holding it. So what you could actually do, if you have brackets like this and they aren't nice and clean and good to line up with, before we put this in, we could run this through, and we can, in fact, you might even want to do this before you attach the outside brackets, but we could put a little mark right at 10 inches here. And so now we know that when this bar goes in, I can bring the top surface up until it's just touching the edge of my mark. And actually, after I've done that, this feels very lined up on the store-bought T-bracket. So we're in a pretty good spot there. Okay, but let's go ahead and get our clamps ready. So I'm going to go ahead and push this and line it up as best I can, just by feel here. Okay, and here's the thing. If you drilled this one perfectly, if this T-bracket was perfectly attached, then lining it up perfectly on this one means you'll have a perfect 90-degree corner. But if this one was off a little bit, then if you follow that angle, your whole bar will be off a little bit. So that's why we're going to double check it with the square to make sure it's right. And for me, this square doesn't fit very well between the 2 brackets. So I wasn't able to use this square. It gets too tight for me to go in there. So yours may work, and it may not. So you may have to find a smaller square to do it. If you don't have a choice, you can kind of on the outside edge here, line it up and tip it down, and you can still kind of see, you got to look down a little bit to see kind of what it looks like there, to see if it's any good. But it can work that way if that's all you have. All right, so I'm going to get my clamps ready here. Okay, and once again, I made it tight, but snug, but not tight, let's say, so that I will be able to still move pieces around. And I'll try to get this one Still think we want 2 clamps. You might be able to get away with 1 clamp here just because everything is kind of already fastened and it's touching that back wall. But 2 clamps is always better than 1. Now, where I put that clamp, I'm gonna have a hard time measuring the square. Like it doesn't fit in there. So let me take this one off. I'm gonna put both clamps on the same side so we have some access to measure the square. And it's okay if you block one of the holes, because after we do the first hole, we can take that other clamp off. All right, so that feels like it moved just a little bit on me. I'm gonna try to get that lined up flat with the top of the bracket and pushed in all the way. Okay. So that feels pretty close on the bracket, but let's go ahead and bring in our square here and see what we're working with. So needs to be tipped up just a tiny bit. So try to pull that up until it's touching. There we go. And so now this is square to our first piece. It's feeling pretty flat still on the edges. So that looks like we're in a good spot. Now I'm gonna go ahead and tighten down our clamps so things should not move. After tightening down the clamps, I'll go back and recheck the square here. That looks good. I see no gap on the top or bottom. So now we're ready to go ahead and start drilling these holes. So once again, let's go ahead and get this as close to the table as I can. And I'll get one of these clamps on here. Okay, and I can drill this one easily, so let's go ahead and do that one first. When you're supporting this too, it is important that you don't grab the side that's clamped in place to support it. Stick to the whole beam so you can't accidentally adjust stuff. All right, drilling through. And let's get a rivet on that one. Looks good. All right, and the second one, I can't really get a rivet without moving it. And I'm gonna, what am I gonna do? I guess I'm gonna move it because I wanna keep the bottom piece from moving. The top one is good because we have the rivet and the other clamp, but I don't want the bottom piece to move on me while we're doing this. So I'll move that clamp over just to keep the bottom bracket in place. And let's go ahead and rivet our second hole here. Okay, and that time I could support this side a little bit because we have the extra kind of fastener in, but probably still I should have held the end of the already secured piece. Okay, let's rivet this one up. And now we got to flip it over. And our problem here is, of course, I can't drill because the clamps are in the way. So we are going to carefully flip the clamps over. Now, this bar can't move. This bar is kind of our original piece, and this bracket can't move. So actually, technically, it should not be able to move even with the clamps detached. But I'm going to go ahead now, and for that reason, instead of putting 2 clamps back on, I guess we can get by with 1. So let me see if I can get 1 in a spot where we'll be able to drill both holes. If you wanted to, though, you could definitely throw both clamps back on there. Now, because we got this extra bracket coming off, I think if I clamp it in this way, we get the most support. So I can do 1 clamp here. I could actually grab a second clamp now and put it on this side. So that should be really supported and make our drilling easy, which is good because this is our homemade bracket and we've got to drill through a whole extra 1/8 of a wall of aluminum. And this is why, as I clean the hole out, as I deburr this hole, this is why I didn't want to pre-drill the holes necessarily if you're using bolts, because then the alignment will be there. And this is also why I was saying this bracket actually doesn't need to be particularly accurate, because as long as it covers the points we need and we have space to put the rivets in, we're fine. Using the square, right, when we were putting this together, using the square to make sure that the angles were aligned means that even if our bracket is some weird shape that's not anywhere close to correct, our pieces of box, aluminum box, are still going to all be in the right place. And that's really the thing that we care about. All right, rivet that. Let's do one more. We can take the clamp off. I can drill around that clamp because we put it in a good spot. Let's do it. Okay. Take the clamp off so I can deburr a little bit easier. And our last rivet. Okay, so we have our horizontal piece now attached to our vertical piece. This is one side done. And we have a few options for how to proceed from here. Of course, we have to get our second horizontal or second vertical piece attached with the same brackets going on there. And we can attach these brackets to the middle piece first, and then bring the outside piece in. But I think it's harder to align our depth here. Like, it's harder to make sure whether that piece is too far out or too far in. So I think the best way for us to go about doing this is to set this piece down and basically repeat the process on this vertical post that we did to start that one, which is 8 inches up and make a mark. And then that's what we use to align our T brackets to. Okay, so from here, we're going to go up to 8 inches. And the line is past 8, so the line should be visible where I drew it. Again, we can try to make sure it's straight. We could go in and do an extra one of these. And we need that on 2 sides, so I'm going to flip it over. And let's get our 8 inches again. This is where I wish I had 8-inch calipers, because they do make them, and you could just scribe your line right at 8 inches, and everything would be done. All right, the very front edge of that line is at about 8 inches. So we'll copy that. Looks like I was a little... There we go. Okay, so we have our 2 8 inches now. We're going to take our T brackets. And remember, we go 8 inches and then they attach. Oh, actually, so 8 inches is there. So in this case, I need to cover the line because that was the side I put the 8 inches on. But it should be 8 inches just to the very edge of this, and I can double check that if I throw the tape measure out here. The 8 inches is to the inside of that line. Yeah, so I want to cover this line. Another check that you can do here is your first one should be correct, right? So you actually could take the first one, and well, it would be this. It would be this way, and you could see if you hold them together, right? Those lines should line up. You can see I put my lines on opposite sides, but this is also where we want it. So another way that we could do this, instead of doing the lines, and the lines should be fine if you take your time and are accurate, but if I line up my 2 pieces, so they're flush on the ends, then I can line up my T brackets, and that is where they should be attached. And you could even use the square to make sure they're very aligned. So it thinks it should be there, maybe just slightly past my line. Okay, but let me set this one back. We'll continue. All right, and so we need both of these to go on here. So we're going to do our best to line both of them up to the right place. And then we'll get our clamps started. Okay, and snug but not tight yet. And I'll flip this one over so we'll be able to drill on both sides without removing the clamps. And same thing. And my table's pretty flat, so those are probably nice and flat on the table, but I'm going to check just by running this across the back, and that seems good. And it feels like they're pretty good on the back there. And maybe this one could get pushed just a little bit. Okay, I think we're good there. And then what we can do is we can check that 8 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and snug these down because I think they're in a good spot. And even if they are sticking off a little bit, it's going to be okay. But let's see if we are 8 inches to the front of one of these brackets. Well, both of the brackets. Yeah, that looks pretty good to me. So I'm getting just about exactly 8. So I think we're good to go to attach this. So let's go ahead and get this clamped up onto our table here. Which way is, I think this way works the best for me. So clamp that up. Huh. Oh, I'm on the bracket. I was like, if it twists on you, if it won't sit flat, then double check to see if you're on the bracket or not. I guess I have the second clamp here, so let's do 2. Why not? Okay, and I can drill some of these holes. I can drill these 3 holes. Yeah, I think I can drill all 3 holes across the middle. So we'll do those 3, then we'll flip it over, do all the holes we can do on the other side, and then we can remove the clamps and finish it up. 1. And this one should go fast too because we don't have the homemade bracket anywhere, so we're not drilling through nearly as much material. So this is the box is 1/16 wall. The bracket that we made was 1/8. So when we have to drill through the bracket, it's like drilling through 2 extra walls. So it's 3 times the work of just drilling through the box only. All right, 2 and 3. Looks good. Okay, we'll flip it over and see what we can do on the other side. Well, we'll get the 2 we can get. That one, yeah, it still probably maybe is okay. All right, but we'll get these 2. I think we can get this one without hitting the clamp. Yeah, just barely. Okay, and then it's now safe to take the clamps off because we got 3 rivets on each side holding everything together. And let's go get the last 2 holes on each side. And I just broke the rule I told you, which was always drill 1 hole at a time and then rivet. There are some times you can get away with it. Like when we already have 3 rivets in, it's really unlikely for the pieces to shift. So this is the time you can get away with it. You probably still should do 1 at a time, but once it's kind of locked in place and it can't move on you, then you can kind of drill an extra hole here and there. All right, let's get clamped up for the other side. Okay, we have 2 holes to do here. All right, so this side of our H is now done. It's looking good. Feels pretty flat. I have a little bit of a bump on this side, so I wasn't perfectly aligned. But that's okay. Let's go get the other half. And now we need to put them together. Okay, and at this point, right, like you can't do it wrong, because if they don't line up, double check that. If they don't line up, make sure you flip it over. And that's going to end up sliding in there. And just like before, I'm going to do my best to line it up on the T-brackets that are here. My T-brackets are slightly misaligned, so I'm going to just pick one of them to align on for now. And then let's go ahead and get our clamp started. Started, but not tight yet. Let's see if we can sneak a second one on. Guess on this one, I really need to do them both facing the same way, or I'll not be able to drill anything. All right, and let's check our square. Well, I thought I left enough room, but I did not. So let's move this on the bottom here. It's going to be easier if I start all over. Okay, here we go. That feels pretty good. Let's tighten it down. Once again, another step that will be easier if you have a person, extra couple people. Somebody can hold on to things. You could even have in this step, like as I'm clamping this in place, if you have the extra set of hands, somebody can actually be here with the square as well and be making those adjustments. So, you know, by the time we're ready to actually clamp it, by the time the person comes up with the clamp, everything is already lined up and ready to go. And let's get our second clamp on somewhere, anywhere, except there, because then I won't be able to measure with the square. So we'll go down here. Okay, check the square again. It's just a teeny bit. Just got to give it a teeny bit here. Looks good. Let's tighten it down. And then one more check before we commit. You can double check the other side. Looks good. So I think we're in a good spot here. Yep. Okay, so this whole thing now gets hard, but you know, put it somewhere like this. It's okay, even though it's not sitting flat, we're on kind of that bolt head over here, but it'll be supported enough for us to get this first hole drilled. So let's do that. And rivet it. Okay, and where do we go from here? I guess I'll take this one clamp off. I might need to adjust the other one as well. There we go. All right, since I move stuff around, let me once again check to see if it's still square. And it is not quite. All right, so good thing we checked. With just one rivet, we can still bend it to adjust. So now we look like it's pretty square. So we're gonna go ahead and get our second rivet attached here. Okay. And then let's flip it over. And it shouldn't be able to move now because we have rivets on the other side, but I'm going to flip this clamp over and put this clamp back on. And one more time just to be super, super safe. Are we still square? We are still square. All right, so now we're ready to go ahead and do the rivets on the other side. And the last rivet. We'll take our clamps off. And let's do one more check to see how we did. So we'll come in. Now everything is completely secure, so let's check our square here. That is pretty good. On the other side, pretty good. Maybe the smallest hint of daylight at the bottom. Over here, that side is good. And this side, I guess if it matches, we should have a small hint of daylight at the top. And we do just the smallest hint. So that is going to be good enough for us. We want to do kind of one more check, which is, we want to make sure that we are actually, we should be 18 1/4 across. And we're looking pretty good at 18 1/4. And you can see, actually, if you measure the top of mine, it is just under 18 1/4. And the bottom is just over 18 1/4. So it's really, really close to 18 1/4 on both sides, but that's why this one piece is just bent just the ever slightest amount out. You can probably actually still manhandle this and get it to angle more at this point, and that's okay. Then what'll happen is when we drop this into the frame of the robot, and I think it goes this way, and attaches into the frame of the robot, then that's gonna further secure it and hold it. And then we'll attach the top to our diagonal piece, which is going to be the next video. So this is it. If you've got your H done, you're done with this step, this sub-assembly of the process. Ready to move on to the next video? I will see you there. Before we go, special thanks to First and Argosy Foundation for making this possible.